War is won by exceptions. It is a truth as old as conflict itself. We believe history is shaped by armies, by grand strategies, by men moving maps and divisions, but this is a comforting illusion. The true pivots of destiny are often invisible. They are the whispers that change a mind, the secrets that reroute a battalion, the courage of a single unseen soul. The greatest weapon is the one you never see coming. The most dangerous agent is the one who is overlooked entirely. The year is 1941. The world is on fire. The jackboot of the Third Reich has stamped out the lights of Paris, and the shadow of the swastika stretches from the Arctic to the Mediterranean. France is broken. Half is occupied. The other half, Vichy, is a puppet dancing on Berlin's strings. Into this nightmare, into this fortress of fear and collaboration, the Allies need to send a spark, someone to organize, to build, to resist. The American government had already looked at her. They had seen her ambition, they had seen her brilliance, and they had seen her leg. And they said no, she was unfit for service, a woman, an amputee, a liability. This is the story of Virginia Hall, and it is the story of how the woman the world deemed incapable became the single most dangerous, most effective, and most hunted Allied spy in occupied France. Virginia Hall was not born for the shadows. She was a child of Baltimore privilege, a world of debutante balls and expected marriages. But her spirit was restless. It did not crave the drawing room, it craved the horizon. She was educated at Radcliffe and Barnard, mastered French, German, and Italian, and set her sights on the one place a woman was least expected, the diplomatic corps. She wanted to be an ambassador. She was sharp, multilingual, and driven. She earned a clerical post at the U.S. Embassy in Warsaw, then moved to Izmir, Turkey. Her career was beginning. And then, a gunshot in the Turkish countryside. It was not a sound of war. It was a simple, stupid accident. A hunting trip in 1933. She tripped while climbing a fence and her own shotgun discharged into her left foot. The wound was catastrophic. Sepsis set in. To save her life, doctors had to amputate her leg below the knee. Her life, as she knew it, was over. She was fitted with a heavy wooden prosthetic, a clumsy, chafing device she would come to nickname Cuthbert. When she was finally recovered and ready to resume her duties, to take the Foreign Service exam, the U.S. State Department delivered its final verdict. A 1924 rule, a bureaucratic footnote, banned anyone with a missing limb from serving as a diplomat. It was, they ruled, a liability. She was incomplete, unfit. Imagine the echo of that rejection. It was a slamming door, not just on a career, but on a life of purpose. The world had looked at her mind, her will, her languages, and seen only the 7 pounds of wood and metal strapped to her leg. This rejection would become the furnace that forged her. It was a quiet, bureaucratic violence that would ignite a fire the Gestapo itself could not extinguish. She resigned in 1939, adrift. The world was preparing for war, and she had been sidelined. But war has a use for people the world throws away. When Paris fell in 1940, she was in the city. She did not run for home. She drove an ambulance. She ferried wounded French soldiers from the front lines, dodging Stuka dive bombers until the surrender made it impossible. She made her way to London, a refugee with a fire in her eyes. And in London, she found someone who did not care about her leg. She found the Special Operations Executive, the SOE. This was Britain's last desperate gamble. An organization conceived in shadow, its purpose summed up by Winston Churchill in a single brutal phrase: set Europe ablaze. The SOE was not a traditional military unit. It sought out saboteurs, assassins, and organizers. They didn't care about diplomatic protocol. They cared about results. They saw Virginia, not as a disabled woman, but as an American who spoke flawless French, who had undeniable courage, and who possessed a rage that could be aimed. She was exactly what they were looking for. In August 1941, Virginia Hall crossed into Vichy France. She was not a soldier. She was not a diplomat. She was Agent 3844. Her code name, Germaine. She arrived in Lyon, the dark, damp heart of the collaborationist regime. Her cover was that of a reporter for the New York Post, a correspondent sending back stories about French life. It was the perfect disguise, giving her a reason to travel, to ask questions, to meet people. And beneath this cover, she began to weave. A spy network is not a thing of action, not at first. It is a thing of whispers. It is a living entity, fragile and delicate, built one person at a time. It is trust, cultivated in the most untrusting time in human history. Virginia, the woman deemed unfit, began her work. She moved through the cafes of Lyon, her slight limp almost unnoticeable. She listened. She identified patriots, a baker who could hide a radio operator, a nun who could smuggle messages, a doctor who could treat wounded airmen. This was her first mergullo de profundidade, the psychological one. She was not just fighting the Nazis. She was fighting the ghost of her own rejection. Every agent she recruited, every safe house she established, every piece of intelligence she sent back to London was a strike against the men in Washington who had told her no. Her work was precise. She organized the reception of other SOE agents, finding them papers, identities, and work. She coordinated parachute drops in the dead of night, retrieving canisters of weapons and money. Let us pause and understand what this meant. This was not a movie. A parachute drop was a symphony of risk. Virginia would have to find a reception committee, farmers she could trust with their lives. She would have to find a field, remote but accessible, flat but hidden. She would transmit the coded coordinates to London via a wireless operator. And then they would wait. Imagine the scene. 2 o'clock in the morning. The cold moon hidden by clouds. Virginia and 3 French farmers standing in a damp field, their breath pluming. The only sound is the wind in the trees and the distant bark of a dog. They are listening for the low, distinct thrum of a British Halifax bomber, flying dangerously low, off course, engines muffled as best they can. Then the sound, a dark shape against the darker sky. A signal flashes from the ground, a prearranged letter in Morse code, an answering flash from the plane, and then the blossoms. Black silk parachutes opening in the night, the heavy thud of canisters hitting the earth. The plane is gone in 30 seconds. Now, the real work. They must drag the canisters, heavy with explosives, Sten guns and gold, and hide them before sunrise, before a German patrol or a collaborating neighbor stumbles upon the tracks. This was Virginia's world. She built the Heckler Network, one of the first and most effective in all of France. She was a master organizer. She financed resistance cells. She arranged the escape of downed Allied pilots. She gathered intelligence on troop movements, factory production, and German defenses. She became the central hub for SOE operations in the South, and the Germans began to notice. This woman was too good. Reports filtered in. There was an agent, a coordinator. Someone was building a web, and it was choking their operations. They didn't know her name, but they had a description. A woman, tall, American, and she had a limp. The Gestapo in Lyon was run by one of the most infamous figures of the war, Nikolaus Klaus Barbie, the butcher of Lyon. He was a sadist, but he was not a fool. He focused his entire security apparatus on finding this single mysterious agent. Posters went up. Wanted, the limping lady. Die hinkende Dame. Klaus Barbie gave her a unique distinction. He declared her the most dangerous of all Allied spies. Think about this. Not the most dangerous female spy. The most dangerous spy. Period. The woman the U.S. State Department had dismissed as a liability was now the #1 target of the Gestapo's most ruthless hunter. Her network grew. Her successes mounted. But so did the danger. The noose was tightening. Klaus Barbie's radio detection vans roamed the streets of Lyon, listening for the illicit transmissions of her wireless operators. Friends were arrested. Safe houses were raided. The air itself began to feel thin. Virginia was a master of disguise, a milkmaid, an old woman. But she could not disguise Cuthbert. Her limp was her signature. The work she did was not just heroic, it was vital. If you find this story of resilience and courage as compelling as I do, I invite you to share this narrative. The story of Virginia Hall is a testament to the fact that our perceived weaknesses can become our greatest strengths. Help us honor her memory by spreading her story. In November 1942, the fragile balance of power in France shattered. The Allies landed in North Africa under Operation Torch. In retaliation, the Germans broke the terms of the armistice and invaded the Free Zone. Vichy France was no more. The Wehrmacht and the Gestapo flooded south. For Virginia, this was a catastrophe. The limited cover she had enjoyed was gone. The Gestapo was now in full, unambiguous control. The order came from London. All agents evacuate immediately. The border with Spain was sealed. The Pyrenees, the massive mountain range separating France from neutrality, was her only way out. And it was November. The mergulho sensorial of this journey is almost unimaginable. This was not a hike. It was an ordeal. Virginia, with her 7-pound wooden leg, had to make a 50-mile trek over high-altitude mountain passes in the dead of winter. The cold was a living thing. It was a predator. It sank its teeth into her skin. The snow was waist-deep in places, a thick, sucking morass that tried to pull her down. And then there was Cuthbert. The prosthetic, her constant, clumsy companion, became a device of pure torture. The wood and metal absorbed the cold, transmitting it directly into the raw stump of her leg. The straps, caked with ice, rubbed her skin raw. Every single step was a new, fresh, agonizing pain. It was a friction of frozen leather and raw flesh. She and her guides walked for days. The wind was a physical blow, a constant shriek that stole the breath and froze the tears on her face. Her good leg burned with exhaustion. Her stump was a screaming pulp of agony. She radioed London in a moment of desperate, grim humor. Her message: Cuthbert is giving me trouble. The operators in London, unaware of her nickname for the prosthetic, replied in confusion, "If Cuthbert is giving you trouble, have him eliminated." She pushed on, sheer unadulterated willpower. She was driven by a force stronger than the pain. She was not just escaping the Gestapo. She was, once again, defying the world that told her she was unfit. She would not be beaten by a mountain. She would not be beaten by her own body. When she finally staggered across the border into Spain, she was arrested. The Spanish, though neutral, were sympathetic to the Axis. She was thrown into Figueres prison, a dark, cold, filthy place. Her escape had failed at the final hurdle. She was trapped. This mergulho psicologico is perhaps the most profound. Imagine the despair. After everything, the hunting accident, the rejection, the years of spying, the hunt by Klaus Barbie, the agonizing trek over the mountains, to end up in a Spanish jail, with the very real possibility of being handed back to the Germans. It would have broken anyone. But Virginia Hall was not anyone. From her cell, she found a way to smuggle a note to the American consul. It took 6 weeks. 6 weeks of uncertainty, of cold, of near starvation. Finally, the diplomatic wheels turned. The United States, not yet fully in the war but powerful, pressured Spain. She was released in the spring of 1943. She made her way back to London. She was a hero at the SOE. She was awarded the Order of the British Empire. She had done more than anyone expected. She had survived. She had earned her rest, but the war was not over. And neither was Virginia Hall. She joined the newly formed American Espionage Service, the Office of Strategic Services, the OSS, the forerunner to the CIA. The irony is bitter. The U.S. government, which had refused her as a diplomat, now desperately needed her as a spy. The SOE refused to send her back to France. She was blown. Her description was in every Gestapo office. The limping lady was too famous. To send her back was a death sentence. The OSS agreed. It was too dangerous. But Virginia insisted. She knew the networks. She knew the people. She knew the landscape. D-Day was approaching. The Allies needed agents on the ground to coordinate the French resistance, the Maquis, to sabotage German communications and supply lines, to pave the way for the invasion. And she had a new idea, a mergulho tecnico into the art of disguise. Her limp had been her liability. It was the one thing she could not hide. So, she decided to feature it. She would not go back as a glamorous American reporter. She would go back as someone the Gestapo would never, ever look for. She trained as a wireless operator, mastering the dangerous art of coded transmission, and she transformed herself. She had her hair dyed a drab gray, pulled back in a severe bun. Her teeth were ground down to resemble those of a poor rural peasant. She learned to shuffle, to make her limp more pronounced, more aged. She dressed in the rough homespun clothes of a farm worker. She would not be the limping lady. She would be an old, tired milkmaid, someone invisible, someone to be ignored. In March 1944, just months before the invasion, Virginia Hall, codenamed Diane, landed on the coast of Brittany from a British PT boat. She was back. She made her way to the Haute-Loire region, a rugged, mountainous area. Her mission was entirely different. She was no longer just an organizer. She was a combat leader. She was a guerrilla chieftain. She carried a heavy wireless set in a suitcase. This was her lifeline and her death warrant. The German Funkspurtrupp, the direction-finding teams, were constantly listening. To stay in one place and transmit was to die. So she was always moving. She rode a bicycle, her prosthetic leg making it a grueling task, moving from farm to farm, from barn to barn. She transmitted her reports, German troop movements, bridge locations, fuel depots, and then she moved again. Imagine the tension, the cold sweat, setting up the aerial in a dark barn, the smell of hay and fear, her fingers, cold, tapping out the Morse code. Dot, dot, dash, dot, dash, dot. The urgent message. German convoy, 20 tanks, heading north on N88. Then, the frantic packing, stuffing the heavy set back into the case, onto the bicycle. Pedaling into the night, Cuthbert a dull ache, her heart pounding, wondering if the vans had gotten a lock on her signal. But she was more than a radio operator. She built an army. The Maquis, the French resistance fighters, were scattered, undertrained, and poorly armed. Virginia, this one-legged American woman disguised as an old peasant, became their nucleus. She used OSS money and her own force of will to weld them into a fighting force. She arranged for massive airdrops of weapons and supplies. She trained them in sabotage. She taught them how to be soldiers. She organized 3 battalions of resistance fighters, men who came to respect and adore this tough, brilliant woman. They called her La Madone, the Madonna. She was their provider, their strategist, and their leader. When D-Day arrived on June 6, 1944, Virginia's networks exploded into action. The work was brutal and constant. Her teams blew up bridges. They derailed trains carrying German reinforcements. They cut communication lines. They created chaos and havoc behind the lines, diverting critical German resources away from the Normandy beaches. Her intelligence reports were legendary. She was directing Allied air power from the ground. Her dispatches, pinpointing German concentrations, allowed Allied bombers to strike with devastating accuracy. She was fighting a one-woman war. The Germans were furious. They knew someone was organizing the terror. They hunted for her. Klaus Barbie, still in Lyon, knew his old enemy had returned. But they were looking for a sophisticated agent. They were looking for the limping lady. They were not looking for a shuffling, gray-haired old milkmaid on a bicycle. Her weakness had become her greatest shield. She was hiding in plain sight. As the Allies broke out of Normandy and pushed south, Virginia's forces joined the fight openly. They liberated towns. They took German prisoners. When the Allied forces finally linked up with her, they were stunned. They were expecting to find a guerrilla leader, a hardened Frenchman. They found Virginia Hall, who calmly reported her successes. Her contribution was immeasurable. The intelligence she provided, the sabotage she directed, the thousands of German soldiers she and her Maquis fighters tied down, saved countless Allied lives. The story of Virginia Hall's time in France is a powerful reminder that our value is not determined by the limitations others place on us, but by the will we have to overcome them. Her life is a masterclass in courage and ingenuity. If you are finding value in this testament to the human spirit, please consider taking a moment to like and subscribe. It helps these stories of quiet heroism reach the audience they deserve. When the war ended, Virginia Hall's contribution was recognized. France awarded her the Croix de Guerre. Britain made her an honorary member of the Order of the British Empire. And from her own country, the one that had rejected her, she received one of its highest honors. President Harry S. Truman wanted to give her the Distinguished Service Cross, the second highest valor award in the U.S. Army. He wanted a public ceremony at the White House. Virginia refused. She was still an operative. She was private. She told the OSS director, Wild Bill Donovan, that she was still operational and most anxious to get on with the work. The ceremony was held privately in Donovan's office. Virginia Hall became the only civilian woman to receive the Distinguished Service Cross in World War II. Her story should have ended there, as a celebrated hero. But the post-war world, in many ways, was no different from the pre-war one. She joined the newly formed Central Intelligence Agency, and once again, she ran into the same walls she had faced in 1933. She was a woman. She was disabled. She was a field agent, a legend, a warrior, and they put her at a desk. This mergullo de contexto is the final, tragic irony of her life. The men who ran the CIA, many of them Ivy League bureaucrats who had never faced a Gestapo agent, saw her as an anomaly. She was promoted, but slowly. She was given analysis work, not operations. The woman who had organized armies, dodged the butcher of lion, and survived the Pyrenees in winter, was now fighting a battle against memos and glass ceilings. She met her husband, Paul Guillot, another OSS agent at the agency. They worked together, but she was, for the rest of her career, sidelined. She retired in 1966, a quiet, modest life. She died in 1982, and her story was largely forgotten, buried in classified files. But a legacy like hers does not stay buried. What is her true legacy? It is not the medal she received in secret. It is not the desk she sat at in Langley. Her legacy is written across the fields and mountains of France. It lives in the memory of the Maquis fighters she led. It exists in the freedom of the country she helped liberate. Virginia Hall's story forces us to ask a fundamental question. What is a weakness? The world told her she was broken. The State Department told her she was unfit. Her body, in the biting cold of the Pyrenees, told her she was finished. She answered all of them with defiance. She did not just overcome her limitation, she weaponized it. She transformed her most visible liability into her most effective disguise. Her story is a bridge from the past to our own hearts. It teaches us that courage is not the absence of fear, but the mastery of it. It shows us that ingenuity is not about the tools you are given, but about how you use the ones you have. She proves that a single determined person, one who refuses to accept the world's no, can indeed set a continent ablaze. She was not a superhero. She was a woman of profound, stubborn, and brilliant moral strength. She was the exception that shaped history. Her name was Virginia Hall. The world told her she was broken, so she used the broken pieces to build an arsenal. The stories we tell shape the way we remember, and in remembering, we honor. The courage of Virginia Hall, the limping lady, is a powerful lesson in resilience that echoes far beyond the battlefields of World War II. If this story of incredible sacrifice and unbreakable will has moved you, please consider sharing it with someone who needs to hear a story of true heroism. And if you have a story of a hidden hero from history, please share their name in the comments below. Let us continue to uncover the legacies of those who changed the world from the shadows.